Hello and welcome to our discussion on flexible working. Today we're going to be focused on professional services and financial services. Interestingly, a recent survey tells us that only 1 in 6 employees that work in businesses don't offer flexible working right now. What used to be considered a perk is now a mandatory offering. That's according to some research recently carried out by Telleware and Lerato, 2 speakers that we have with us today. Financial and professional services companies need to lead the charge in flexible and remote working if they're going to attract the best possible talent, something that has never been more important against the backdrop of Brexit and indeed the growing millennial and Gen Z workforce. The government appears pretty committed, however, to offering Britain's workforce a stronger, flexible working regulation. The right to request flexible working in the UK was introduced back in 2014. And just recently, MP Helen Whately ensured that this is being extended to all jobs in all companies by default. Alongside the importance of employee satisfaction, the UK is facing a productivity challenge. For example, the UK is 31% less productive than France. We'll be discussing these issues in depth and we'll have 10 minutes at the end to answer any questions. You can submit questions through the BrightTalk platform at any time. So if I can now introduce our lovely panelists. First up, Dr. Lucy Green, a specialist in financial and professional services, CEO and founder of business development firm Lerato. She's a top 10 UK business advisor as recognised by Enterprise Nation. Lucy combines strategic insight, structured methodology and a strong commercial intelligence to create value and to grow revenue. Welcome to Lucy. We also have a speaker with us from Bedrock HR, David Mellard. David is going to be talking from a flexible working and talent retention viewpoint. He brings more than 20 years of HR experience to the table at Bedrock HR, and all of his employees work on flexible hours across various co-working spaces across the UK. And joining us up in Yorkshire from Telleware is Marketing Director Mark Elwood. Mark has been working on bridging the productivity and flexible working gap through Telleware's technology and will be telling us a little bit about how we can put some practical infrastructure in place to facilitate flexible and remote working. So welcome to everybody and let's kick off. So taking a quick broad look at flexible and professional sector services, this might be one for you specifically, Lucy. Are these industries behind or ahead of the curve when implementing flexible working policies, do you feel?
Well, it's, as in every industry, it's a bit of a mixed picture. Some organisations are embracing flexible working, particularly I think in the professional services sector. And I think the key reason for the accelerated adoption in certain sectors is that they've realised that it actually helps them to keep and attract skilled workers. And we have a skill shortage right across, particularly in the financial sectors and the insurance sectors, and the professional services sectors are changing quite fundamentally. There is a split really between what you might call traditional advice, which we are all used to, and then more automated advisory services using big data analytics and artificial intelligence and all that kind of thing, where consultancies and professional services firms are looking to provide insights to their customers. And those need really skilled data scientists and those kinds of people, really hard to get. And flexible working is actually sort of one of the things on their must-haves at work. So I think overall, these sectors are probably ahead of the rest of the UK, but it is a little bit fractured. And of course, some financial services organisations are so heavily regulated that it can actually be quite hard to offer flexible working. So there's also barriers in the way.
Fantastic, that's really helpful. So Mark, if I can come to you and understand a little bit more about how perhaps financial and professional services in particular in those regulated spaces can use technology to overcome some of those always on and regulated challenges.
Yeah, Kirsty, I think that the financial and professional services sectors are both going through enormous change at the moment, and they're on a huge learning curve when it comes to the adoption and the consumption of the technology that is available. Um, what we are finding is that these organisations seem to be at the forefront of looking at what is important for their employees. As Lucy says, it's quite a competitive landscape that they're working in. So it's really important that they're able to offer their employees the very best in terms of the technology that is available out in the market. So having technology that is flexible, that enables employees to work how they want to work, where they want to work, and when they want to work, is absolutely crucial to them.
So just picking up on that a little bit, I mean, obviously there's an awful lot of concern around security, especially in this regulated space. How can organisations ensure that they have themselves covered from that perspective?
We commissioned a piece of research earlier this year where it was a qualitative and a quantitative piece of work. So as well as doing a number of focus groups and one-to-one interviews with employees and employers and decision makers within the employer audiences, we also did a web survey. So we questioned more than 100 decision makers and 100 employees. And what we actually found for both of those audiences, security was the number one concern. So specifically what that means is data security came out very, very much at the top of that. So in a post-GDPR world, everybody is very mindful of data security. Actually, what we did see in some of the focus groups was that some of the employees were actually misrepresenting or overrepresenting some of the regulations that sit around GDPR. However, that said, it is of paramount importance. So for any organisation looking to implement new technology, having data security at the top of their agenda is really important to them.
David, if I can bring you in here. Now, increasingly, obviously, people are very comfortable with using technology that they use in their personal life, such as using elements such as WhatsApp. How do people ensure that they can keep this kind of always-on opportunity, and how do employers and employees balance that kind of remote working, working from home, flexible working opportunity with the technologies that are available?
Well, I think technology has, first of all, enabled patterns of working that obviously wouldn't have been possible beforehand. I think for me, the GDPR considerations that Mark just mentioned are important. Obviously, employees have to give permission for any data around them to be shared. So I wouldn't advise a great deal of HR information, for example, is transferred by means of WhatsApp groups. I have one client who doesn't have an office space at all. They provide a service that's on the road, and they meet in cafes and they communicate by WhatsApp all the time. One unintended consequence of WhatsApp, I think, is the fact that so much input happens to it that I'm certainly included, and I find that key information can be lost because 5 pages of WhatsApp have gone through within the last 20 minutes, and I've lost a message that was intended for me. So I think actually using technology is great, but you have to use it for what it's meant for. And I think just be careful about losing messages.
Yeah, could I come in here, because I think that the whole WhatsApp discussion I think is really pertinent at the moment. So obviously WhatsApp started out as a consumer tool, but it's been increasingly adopted by all of us for business purposes. And that does create a problem, particularly for financial services organizations, but also to a certain extent professional services as well. So these businesses have been, for years, they've been putting technology in place that's enabling their employees to communicate effectively but compliantly. And then WhatsApp comes along and people are kind of able to kind of circumnavigate the tools that have been put in place. And when it comes to the instant message capability that WhatsApp actually provides, it is really useful. You know, it's really quick and easy to be able, and informal, to be able to send message via that platform. But it's not regulated and it's not being provided by the employer. So I think that does create a certain challenge for any organisation that is regulated under MiFID II or GDPR or whatever it might be. So I think that it's important for any organisation that is regulated to be able to provide alternatives to WhatsApp that are regulated and that are provided by the employer, that give a certain element of control back to that organisation, so that they can evidence to the regulator that they are doing their absolute everything they possibly can do to meet their regulatory requirements.
Can I also follow up with another observation to answer the first part of your question, Kirsty? I think that whilst people can be available and turn off their phones or their WhatsApps when they want to, culturally there can be a pressure to be available all the time. And whilst people like to use technology and to be flexible, it can become a little bit of a shackle to always have an expectation of always being available. So I think all of this technology, obviously great, and can enhance productivity hugely, but I think it could be counterproductive for people to be expected to be on, say, WhatsApp for 24 hours a day.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a piece of work done by the UK Work Foundation that looked into the successful adoption of mobile working and worker mobility across UK businesses. And really, basically, the key thing they found was that, yes, the technology's out there. You're absolutely right. You do need to be using business grade technology for business purposes, otherwise you are subject to data loss and all the rest of it. But actually the biggest challenge where people were failing was in working practices, so making it really clear up front what the flexible working rules are, helping managers manage it, and making it an equitable thing across the whole organisation rather than just something for the salespeople because they need to be mobile. So I think there is this big cultural gap, but the technology has got to a point now where if you can deploy the business class technology on the person's device, the device that they're used to using, they use WhatsApp because they use it outside work. So if you can kind of blend that experience in a secure way, then I think that really does help you get the most out of flexible working. And there are some organisations doing it and getting really decent improvements in worker productivity and happier staff.
Yeah, I've just got another point to build on that, Lucy. So one of the things that we've been finding as part of our research is that increasing numbers of employees are actually moving away from having a separate business phone and a personal phone. And in some cases, they're actually using their personal phone, but using that for business and for personal use, just from one number. And that's not a great idea for a whole bunch of reasons. One, from a data security perspective, so kind of being able to having to share your personal number for business purposes isn't great in terms of that cultural kind of working practices perspective. So you are always on in that case. But also from a GDPR perspective, kind of sharing your personal number for work practices also isn't great. Then also for the employer, it's not a great idea also, because you've not got any control over that number and the communications that are actually going out using that number as well.
Well, that's a brilliant point. If I can come back to you, David, and talk a little bit about culture. So Lucy gave some greater insight into kind of going beyond the technology and really starting with that base of getting the culture right. Is there some specific advice that you would give in terms of what it is that enables that kind of equality to access culture that Lucy was referring to?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good point. I think, like a lot of interventions, the culture has to be the starting point, and actually, it's a sort of, I think it's a stick and carrot thing, really. The company, the organisation, need to be able to convince themselves that their employees are working in a safe and sensible way. And so the amount of training that's available in the processes behind the technology is key. But I think also having, I think a lot of people really buy into the idea of being able to work when they want to work. Certain tasks enable that. So a lot of our clients will be doing, their staff will be carrying out work that fits around, for example, their childcare responsibilities, etc. Other people want to play golf on a Friday afternoon, and that's perfectly fine. But the cultural piece is that when people are working remotely, there has to be a clear agreement on when they're available to be in communication with their colleagues, when they will have work completed by. Those kinds of things that are easy in an office environment to regulate and control just have to be part of the culture. I think for me the phrase that sums it up is just treating people like grown-ups and actually giving people the technology to enable them to behave as grown-ups and be accountable for their time and their action. Means that the technology is used to enhance rather than create problems.
Brilliant. Lucy, I know there was a survey that that your team had undertaken recently that really looked to understand just how prevalent flexible working was right now. And it was really interesting to see that only 1 in 6 employees work in a business that currently doesn't offer flexible working. So what does that mean for the cultural change that's happening? And how can financial services and professional services in particular stay ahead in that race for best practice?
Well, I think they're on the right lines already. They are, particularly in some of the professional services firms, they are focusing on what they're calling the employee experience. And they've structured that and they're measuring it and they're taking into account, how can they enable their workers to produce their best and deliver their best in a flexible way that fits their lifestyle. And I think that's really the key to it. And when you start looking at that, you're getting other factors coming into play. So it's not just I want to use my own technology because I know how to use it, and etc. But the reputation of the company, it isn't the case anymore that particularly younger workers, they want to go and work for a big company and have a career path and all that kind of stuff. They're very interested in the values of the company and what they're doing in the broader context of the environment. And so it's all of these, it's bringing all of these factors in. And if you look at organisations, I think if anybody is particularly interested in this, Deloitte is doing some really good work in terms of how do you capture the worker experience that's going to be right for your organisation, and then turn it into something tangible that's going to help you to attract and keep the best workers. And it isn't just a UK problem, it's a global problem, because there are skill shortages everywhere in the world. I think I saw, can't remember the date of the number, but it was 100 million skills shortage in the USA in one particular technology discipline. So the numbers are huge, and people work anywhere now. I mean, it really is. That's another technology thing, isn't it? It's possible to work anywhere. So I think the way you stay ahead is think about it in a very rounded way and look at what other people are doing. The financial services markets are very, very good at because the competition is so strong. They're very good at innovating and learning and pushing boundaries. And I think we need to keep, sort of our focus on more of that.
Okay, that's great. We've had one.
Could I just add something? Could I just add something onto the point that Kirsty was making there about the difference in terms of age of employees? So we did some research around this, and we asked would you or have you ever turned down a job opportunity because the firm doesn't allow flexible working? And we actually saw a huge disparity based on age groups. So for the 25 to 34 age group, 25% of them said that they haven't and they wouldn't turn down a job opportunity, whereas for the 55 plus that rose to over 60%. So there's a real difference there, whereas 40% said they already have turned down a job opportunity for the 25 to 34s, whereas that was less than 10%. So you can see that there's a huge disparity. So the millennial generation, if you like, have got a very different expectation around flexible working to the baby boomers or Gen X.
Yeah, and I think actually then you really get down into the weeds then, because if flexible working and the technology that is provided to make flexible working happen is what's going to attract and keep the best people, then actually what I see in the marketplace is that it then comes down to what you're offering. So have you got a nice shiny iMac or a Samsung or an iPhone or whatever it is? I did a little bit of work with Cisco quite recently, and the focus on the technology and everybody having the option of having an Apple, they see as important to them keeping and getting the best people. So it's you've got to the challenge is you've got to span the whole spectre. You've got to think about, well, what's my reputation in the marketplace for environmental things, for social justice, all of those kinds of things, all the way down to, am I actually offering the right platforms and the right devices for people to work on? And so it's, you've got to have a complete holistic vision of how you're going to implement your flexible working.
I think that's absolutely right, Lucy. And I think we're actually working with a client at the moment, and it's really important that the people who are making those decisions for the organisation really understand the needs of their employees, particularly those graduates that are coming through. So this particular person, I think, was probably more of my generation and more of a Generation X. I didn't really kind of understand those kind of new graduates who are coming through, and they would say, yes, these people absolutely really do want a phone, but they were offering a 5-year-old Samsung phone at the time. So I don't think they really did understand what was going on. But I think you're absolutely right. Knowing the technology and that is desired by these young people coming through the organisation is absolutely crucial, and being able to deliver it.
Yeah.
Can I just lift the conversation a little bit beyond the technology, back to some of the culture that Lucy was alluding to? David, a question perhaps for you around trust. So it's a question that's kind of coming from our listeners, saying that actually there's obviously a significant element of trust with anyone that's working remotely and flexibly. And do you have any particular experience or some insight that you can share on how we can permit a flexible working policy after probation, and what kind of infrastructure we might put in place to facilitate that trust on both sides?
Yeah, I think this is actually right at the nub of the issue for a number of our clients, and I think it's a key issue. Time is obviously a precious resource, and people are being paid for their time. That's the nature of the employment psychological contract. But I think the recruitment stage is important in working out what people's motivations are. Once you know their motivations, once you know why they want to take the role, then it helps you to build trust. Because if they're invested, if individuals are invested in their role with their employer, and they see themselves as having an investment in that business succeeding, and that's demonstrable, then I think the issue of trust just goes away in some ways. However, for everyone who is in that situation, you may very well have somebody whose motivation is, potentially under question, and you have to be constantly tapping in with individuals. Things like employee engagement activities, surveys, etc., come into play here, finding out what is motivating people in their work. I think making work interesting as well, and having regular check-ins. If you're just left to your own devices working from home, there's no regular check-in, your manager's really not showing any interest in your work, then you're probably going to take it a little bit easy. If you know that actually there is that regular check-in, either remotely or, importantly, from time to time, face-to-face, I think there's enough there for individuals to know they have to put the best into their work. And I think, actually adapting formal performance management processes to take account of new ways of working is important as well. If your performance review system actually covers issues like productivity when working from home, then I think you're doing as much as you can, really.
And Lucy, as somebody who's very, very focused on success in every guise, what elements would you advise would be helpful in this building trust piece?
Well, I think the nub of it is about, for a worker to be successful, you want them to achieve what you want them to do. You want them to be successful. And I think if you can recognize and build into your culture the fact that as long as people are succeeding, then that's fine. And that means you need to be able to measure success. So I ran a workshop with a board of a digital media company a little while ago, and they got workers who were very creative, and they'd introduced flexible working very successfully, and their attitude was, well, they can have the idea at 3 o'clock in the morning. That might be when they are at their most creative. But if they're doing that and they feel empowered, then to, okay, I've got this great idea, I'm going to capture it, I'm going to make sure it gets fed back into the organisation, then don't expect them to be at their desk at 9 o'clock. If you can get that kind of different perspective within your organisation, actually, in my experience, you'd be surprised what you can achieve. I think some of it, yes, it's about attitude. And the other thing that I've seen is that there's this management layer and this management of managing people that aren't in the office, or you're having to jump on the phone or a call like this to have a conversation and manage people. What's starting to happen is that people feel more empowered when they are managing and being managed like that. And I think then if you are in a position to embrace that kind of thing in your organization, you are going to be much more successful. I'm going to be a little bit sort of techno-weenie now and quote a piece of research by the Bank of England, which I think is absolutely fantastic. They measured, this was the chief economist at the Bank of England, and the piece is called The Productivity Puzzle. I'm sure that some people on their line will know about it. But they measured the productivity of UK companies, and they found that only 1% of UK companies were actually productive in what would be called a competitive sense, and that those companies had been able to embrace technology in their working practices to be more flexible. So I think, the evidence is there, and there's so much scope for others to learn from what the top 1% have done. I think it's really exciting. There's an awful lot of potential.
Fantastic. Now, Mark, I know that your organisation, Teleware, works across a breadth of all sorts of different sectors and organisations. What would you say you have experienced from those, perhaps some of those top 1% of high-performing organizations that are enabling flexibility? What practical applications can others take from what's working there?
I think one of the important things in this area is to think about employee choice, because not everybody works in the same way. So therefore, the types of technology that different employees want and need will differ. So being able to provide a portfolio of products and services from a technology perspective that employees can choose to use, I think can add an extra layer of flexibility in terms of how that organization can actually operate. So we're working with a large corporate at the moment. They're a tier 1 bank, and they had a challenge around their mobile phone offering. So it was very limited in terms of what they were currently offering. And they had a problem with employee satisfaction that was linked to that. So they came to us and they wanted to offer an alternative to that, because these employees didn't necessarily want to be carrying around a separate business phone and a personal phone. So they came to us and to speak to us about Recall, which is an application-based product which provides a second number that you can load onto any phone in the world. So they wanted to actually offer that as an alternative to providing a separate business device. Now that wouldn't be great for everybody, but for those employees that were really keen to kind of move away from that business provided mobile phone, it was really attractive to them. And what they're seeing is that employee satisfaction is increasing, productivity is increasing, and actually they're actually able to kind of to reduce expenditure because they're not actually providing the hardware for employees as well.
Or managing it.
Indeed, that's a good point, that Lucy. So yes, it actually takes some of the burden off the IT team in terms of managing a smaller mobile estate as well.
That's really interesting, that idea around really bringing environmental and sustainability elements into it, and moving technology on into apps in all realms. Lucy, is there perhaps something that you could kind of add to this idea of really the environmental sensitivities that organizations are beginning to build into their culture?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's becoming more important. I mean, from, I think, external pressure, and so I think the agenda is moving on from, well, which charities are we supporting and what's our corporate social responsibility policy in terms of trying to put something back, and actually trying to integrate environmental responsibility into the way that the organization actually functions. And so, if you think about the number of mobile phones that organizations actually get through, and there are organizations now that are coming up and they will environmentally recycle old mobile phones from businesses, etc. But actually, if you can, and this not just for a mobile, but for a computer or any kind of those sorts of technologies, if you can enable people to work the way they want on their own devices, not only do you take all of that cost and potential complexity out of the organization, but then you're not having the impact on the environment by effectively increasing the overall number of devices that every person on the planet has. There was a few years ago, there was a piece of research done again by Cisco that said by 2020, the average number of devices that a person would have was between 7 and 8, which is a lot. And I think I see and hear organisations talking about that. And it used to be seen as a, oh gosh, isn't that interesting kind of thing, to, oh gosh, actually, that's not necessarily such a great thing. What can we do to help, do our bit in terms of the environmental responsibility. So I know I've linked that back to tech, but then the other things that companies are doing, which I think is fantastic, is is really enabling their workforces to go and take part and contribute back into local environments. So I did some work with Virgin Media Business, where part of the overall kind of, we were doing a go-to-market campaign, and Virgin Media Business people were going into their local community and helping to see what they could do, and it's little things like that, I think, and you put that together with the technology piece, and you start to build a different and a bigger picture. So I think the next 5 years is going to be, we're going to see a lot of change in this respect, not least because we have a much better understanding. We've got more automation, more artificial intelligence, and more data to give us insights into how well we're performing. I mean, we've touched a little bit on productivity. Productivity is a massive problem for the UK, and the more productive we are, actually, I think there is a potential to link. We can be more productive and more socially responsible and more environmentally responsible, and I think that's the best way forward.
I think you're absolutely right to bring up that idea around productivity. It's interesting to note that the UK is so far behind the French in that environment. Is there a particular industry? Is the financial services and professional services industry particularly struggling with productivity at the moment, Lucy?
Well, every industry is struggling, but financial services, insurance, and certain parts of professional services, so management consulting, for example, are absolutely struggling. They've been hit very hard with increased regulation. They've got increased competition. There's competition coming from overseas. Some parts of the financial services industry have been struggling with legacy technology. I went to a presentation by one of the senior management at RBS a few weeks ago, and they were talking about how they had sort of steered the ship they have with their existing systems and their existing products and services, but then they'd nurtured this group of new fintech organizations that were all part of the group, but they were learning how to innovate and how to become more productive from these new, smaller organizations that had been given pretty much free rein within the bank. And this presentation that I went to was to launch some of these new services that were coming from the smaller organizations. So we've got this whole kind of blended thing going on as well, which if you're a big organization, you need to do. Big organizations struggle to innovate. You have to get some innovators in and help them help you to get better.
Brilliant. Mark, from a technical perspective, and as somebody who's spent quite a lot of time really looking to investigate and understand levels of productivity and how technology can bridge that gap, is there anything in particular that you're doing at Teleware that's really pushing the envelope from an innovation perspective? Is there any processes or infrastructures that you use that helps you and your team to continue to innovate that you can share?
We're on a learning curve ourselves in terms of our flexible working kind of policy, if you like. So as an organisation that's got quite a disparate workforce, I myself live over 100 miles away from our office. So kind of managing a team and working within a wider team, I have to use technology really effectively to get the most out of my own day, but also out of my team's day as well. And we are an innovation company, so being able to kind of keep that innovation at the forefront of what we do on a daily basis is absolutely crucial. So we do things kind of remotely, so we have an innovation platform that we use to submit ideas and to comment on those ideas and build ideas whilst working remotely. But then also we do things on a face-to-face basis, so we'll have hackathons and things where we'll actually get together and have that collaborative working on a face-to-face basis. So yeah, I think that kind of keeping innovation at the forefront of what we do is a big part of what we do on a daily basis.
Can I just jump in with something there? I think that individuals want to feel that they're making a difference in their workplace, and encouraging innovation is a double benefit. One, the outputs from that innovation are clearly useful. But I think certainly where there's more of a sense of team in some of our clients, one of the contributing factors is a sort of head scratching, chairs turned in. What are we actually going to do to make this thing better? How are we going to change? How are we going to innovate? And particularly in career companies where a lot of professional services where you on a sort of examination path where you start at one level and then you progress. There's a huge benefit in encouraging people to share their ideas where there are no wrong answers and where the team can kind of build together. It doesn't mean they're all in the same space, they're not all in the same room, but it does mean that voices are listened to, and that's a massive motivator for particularly younger employees.
Great. I think that's super helpful. What I'd quite like to do now is there's some great questions coming through from the audience. So I'd like to put these to our panelists, if I may. The first one, aside from connectivity, what other challenges are there in making flexible working work? Mark, if I could kick off with you with that one. What is it other than connectivity that are the challenges that our organisations are struggling to make flexi working work?
What I talk about is the BYOD, bring your own device element to flexible working. So this market, people who kind of working in technology kind of see this as being quite a mature market. However, a Global Insight study recently kind of said that that market is expected to grow from $30 billion globally in 2014. Nearly $370 billion by 2022. So actually, that market is growing enormously at the moment. So kind of thinking about bring your own device as an enabler to flexible working, I think is one of the things that's going to be actually key. I think we talked about earlier around building up trust and having outcomes as one of the key elements of for employees. So rather than thinking about people being sat and chained to a desk from 9 to 5, it's about being outcome driven, measuring against those outcomes. So culturally, from a measurement perspective, I think there's some of the elements to actually implement that's going to have quite a significant impact.
Could I just add something to that? I think there are two things. The first of all, about half of organisations that try to implement flexible working fail. And the prime reason they fail is they don't have the right policies in place. So it absolutely comes back to what we've been talking about making it clear what the rules are, you know, and what flexible working means in that organisation. The other thing is that, and I'm not quite sure what the audience member meant by connectivity, but he did spring, or she did spring, something into my mind. There is a huge difference regionally in productivity. And you won't be surprised to hear that we're more profitable at we're more productive in the southeast than we are in the north and in the Midlands. And there is a proven direct link between the connectivity infrastructure and productivity. That's been proven, and one of the things I'm really pleased to see is that the fairly new government digital agenda does actually seem to be actually taking this on board. Without the connectivity infrastructure, you will still struggle with productivity. So I just in case that was what the audience member was thinking about, there is definitely a direct link.
Can I ask, are there any particular downsides to working more flexibly? Another audience question.
Yeah, cabin fever.
Is there a FOMO, a fear of missing the office, that might pop up for some?
Yeah. Well, people report report that it's if you're working flexibly and you're working at home and you're on your own, it's difficult to feel part of a team. I did a piece of work with an organisation whose name I won't mention, but this was really interesting. They were quite a big company. All of their people were deployed off-site. So they had a very small management team. They had people all around the world. And what they asked us to do was to come in and help them make people feel like they belonged to this company, because this company was employing them, but they got tech, specialist skills. So they were being deployed in banks, in nuclear power stations, all around the world. And when you join a job and day one you get sent to, I don't know, Barclays, you think you work for Barclays. Well, actually, your paycheck is coming from somewhere else. This is an extreme example. But, if you are working remotely and flexibly, you do struggle to feel part of the team. And so the organisation has to work harder.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I also feel a lot of our clients are smaller, sort of up to about 50 employees. But the link between working at home and working in the same space as others, various surveys have said people are happier when there's a sort of 3-2 ratio, or at the outside of 4-1 ratio of time spent with others and time spent on their own. And it will, earlier on the point was made that people are individuals, and what suits one person might not suit another. And I think part of the culture has to be checking in with the individual, that you're not trying to force them into a pattern that doesn't suit them. But I certainly feel there needs to be a strong element of pulling people together in the same physical space, whether that's for a sort of social activity or whether it's to share company information, to exchange ideas. I think is less important than building that sense of being part of the same unit, the same team. So I think that's obviously the biggest consideration.
I agree, David, and I think that flexible working should be that. It should be flexible. It shouldn't be forcing people to work at home, as opposed to for people to come into an office. So it's about having balance and enabling employees to have that balance of working off-site when for a reason that it suits them, or it suits the organisation, or it suits a particular piece of work that they're doing, but then also being able to have that community and having that ability to communicate effectively with their colleagues and with their customers and whoever else it is that's important for them to be able to communicate with.
So if I were to ask you all individually, what would be your kind of top tips for successful flexible working for this particular audience that we're talking to today, which is the professional services and financial services community? Lucy, sorry to throw you on the spot there. What would you suggest your top tips were?
Always start out with, what outcome do you want? So is this about attracting and keeping staff? Is it about making you more productive? And then work back from there, because the answers will be different, and the answers will be different for every organisation that's listening on this call. But if you can start to unpick, if attracting and keeping skilled staff is your top priority, then okay, what employee experience do I want to deliver, and what are the elements of it? What does my brand do to that? What does my corporate practices do to that? And unpick it and work back and make sure that you are aligning what policies you're going to put in place to make sure that you land in the right place. And I would always encourage, go ask, don't sit in your office and think, well, we want to deliver a great employee experience and this is what it is. Go and ask first. That would be the start where you want to end up and work back.
Fantastic. So David, we've heard a little bit there about, start with the end in mind, don't make any assumptions. And also, we've heard from Lucy that the most successful organisations are those that are adopting flexible working. So from your perspective, from a cultural perspective, what would you suggest your top tips were?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is be really clear in the recruitment stage where people will be, what opportunities there are. I think once people are in, it's all about checking, really. It's all about checking individuals, making sure that they're happy, their needs are met, and at the same time making sure that they know where to go if their situation changes and they're thinking, actually, this isn't suiting me. Not putting pressure on, but making sure that expectations are known.
Brilliant. And Mark, I'm coming to you next. From a technical perspective, what are those top tips that that people can put in place that will enable that successful, flexible experience for workers of organisations of all sizes?
Well, absolutely. Everybody should be using Recall. There's an unashamed plug there for Recall. But Recall is it's a great piece of technology that enables any organisation to add more choice into their mobile offering for their employees. So it's kind of helps the environment. It cuts down on the resources and the carbon footprint that any organisation has. And it means it provides better choice and also better flexibility for their employees. So that's my number one tip. Explore Recall and implement it for your organisation.
Thank you all very, very much. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all three of you for a wonderful and lively discussion. We've covered an awful amount of topics there, from productivity through to cultural success, through to understanding the difference both geographically and from a population perspective in terms of those that make up our today's vibrant workforce. So to Mark Elwood from Teleware, thank you very much. To also David Mellard from Bedrock HR, thank you. And of course, Dr. Lucy Green from Lerato, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.